the role of the licensed engineer in the federal waters of the OCS. That's what we're here about today. So let's talk about some goals for today's talk. What's a professional engineer do? Who does he serve? What moved the federal regulators to the licensed PE in the OCS? How the professional engineer helps federal regulators and protects the public. Strengths and weaknesses of the professional engineering requirement. Is there a better way? So what defines a professional engineer? Today, a professional engineer has to have a 4-year degree from a ABIT university. No longer is experience something that goes on. So has to have a 4-year degree in a engineering profession. Okay. Now, he or she has to take 2 tests. When they get out of college, they take the fundamentals of engineering. For us older guys, back in the old days, we called it an EIT. You take that when you get out of college. The last test you take is a professional engineering exam. Now let me tell you the first thing that I want to tell you. Anybody that tell you that you really don't need to be a PE is not a PE. If you ever have an engineer say, you really don't need to be a PE, they're not a PE. They're generally not, okay? That doesn't mean they're not a good engineer, by far not. I waited till I was 56 years old to take the first test, and I waited till I was 57 years old to take the license test. So it can be done at an older age. I did it because of my condo. Now the PE earns their license from a state's license board. There are no federal PE license boards. Understand that's a significant deal here. There's no federal PEs. They all belong to the states. To retain the license of PE, the important part of PE has to take at least, in most states, 15 professional credits a year. Some of you are in here because of that. In Louisiana, we used to say 30 hours every 2 years. That has changed. So again, it would depend what state you're in and what license you're representing. If you've got it across several states, and you have to be up on what that state requires. And these are in the area of your expertise. Now you can't be a professional engineer doing casing design and study something in pouring concrete or doing drywall. They offer excellent courses in that for licensed engineers. I would suggest that's probably one you shouldn't take. Now the Engineer's Creed from NSPE, it's an interesting deal. And I want to point out one of the things it says, and the public welfare above all considerations. The PE does not protect, the federal government does not protect the operator. The PE protects the public. That's our job. And interesting, the last part it adds, with need for divine guidance. That's usually not from the regulators. That's usually not going to be from the operator. That's going to be from somebody above, and you hope that he's watching over you when you're watching those decisions. Now, what moved the federal regulators to the licensed PE and the OCS? 2010, it really was like going to the beach. Regulations were quite simple to work in the federal OCS structure. Now, in 250, 198, really all they offered was the documents of reference that you had to have some idea about. Most did not, were 4, and you had to design your casing strings and liners to withstand anticipated stresses, and those included thermal effects and combinations thereof. Okay, that's an important concept, and we'll see this one again. But this was before Macondo. Another thing it also said, before Macondo, the rule said the casing design must include safety measures that ensure well control and during the life of the well. We're going to see that one again here. These were before Macondo. So prior to April 20th, 2010, before the storm came up, no PE was required to review any work for certification of federal waters. Not one. Now here's an interesting concept. You have no problem as the public to enter a public building, to cross a bridge, to go down a public highway that a licensed engineer has not reviewed the drawings and said it meets standard. You have no problem. You have no problem when you go in the doctor's office. The first thing you do when you go and you sit down in the waiting room, you look up on the wall and see, where did he go? Where was his residence at? Has he got some experience in whatever you have? Obviously, you're not going to go to a brain surgeon for ear, nose, and throat, or gastro for muscular problems, okay? You want to go to the right person, but you expect they've had some knowledge, okay? Again, this wasn't required. It just wasn't required. And in the oil business, everybody in the oil business, including the regulators, said, it's not needed, we know what we're doing. Hey, everything's rosy. And then Macondo. So in response, the first thing that was issued was a report came out before the containment had got finished, May 27th, and this was increased measures for energy development on the outer shelf. So now the BSEE's moving, and one of the things that they recognized in this report is that unsafe offshore drilling operations often result from human error. Well, anything that happens, we always say, yeah, that's a common problem. OCS said also a systems approach. They wanted the operator to do a systems approach to safety that incorporated the best practices from around the globe. So what they said was, what we have here, there may be something even better that we're not using. Okay. The last part, they wanted to finalize a rule that would related to the investigation surrounding the BP oil spill. So that rule was forthcoming and took some time to happen. Now, December 15, 2010, before all the reports had got done, NSPE, which is the National Society of Professional Engineers, they wrote the Chemical Safety Board. Now, for these big disasters, despite all the other reports, really the Chemical Safety Board is the one that does it for when plants blow up or when you have large spills or you have whatever, the Chemical Safety Board's involved. And they were certainly involved in this one. And NSPE wrote to them and said the licensed professional engineers should have direct supervision over all engineering design, operations, and maintenance of offshore oil rigs. Now that's really not a bad deal, but we had a problem. There weren't enough that had the experience, period. That's a fact. In fact, under AADE, American Association of Drill Engineers, we did a survey. Out of the whole city of Houston, we found 65, okay? Out of New Orleans, I think we had 7, all right? And a lot of those were not willing to stamp. They were scared to death to stamp, okay? So again, we were startled by the numbers and we never published those numbers, okay? Coming right after it, one of the things that they changed is in the documents that were under documents of reference, remember the other 4 or the 5 that we had mentioned earlier, they changed and said anything in the document that says should and shall, now it means must. Now that was something API pushed back because on a recommended practice, should and shall is a recommended practice. But the federal government said, oh no, must. If we bring them in, it's must, okay? So now you had to have knowledge of these documents. The other thing they brought in, which was really good, was 65-2, isolating potential flow zones during well construction. And this is one of the ones that the PE has to be right in the middle of and understand completely. Okay, one of the also things they added was a written description that you had to add in 2010, and they said best practices from 65-2. So you actually had to write it into your program, into your APD saying, yeah, we acknowledge it, we recognize it, okay? Now, they also brought in 2010, right after the blowout, they were going to bring a PE in and said that the PE would look and verify that there were 2 independent tested barriers, that the casing design was appropriate, and in addition to cement, we had the dual mechanical barriers were brought in on the final casing design. So now they're requiring a PE to review the work before it went to the federal government, okay? So this was the first step. This is what happened directly after Macondo, and again, at the end of 2010. These rules began to be brought into, they were being looked at as law, but at the time, each of the districts the districts at their level, district manager said, that's what I want. That's what we're going to do. That's how they did it. That's how they got it done. One of the other deals on the abandonment. So we went from drilling to the end of the life of the well, and they brought the PE on the abandonment and said, I want you to look at the procedures and I want you to look at the cementing and make sure that we can bury the animal properly. And that's what they wanted. From the beginning of the life of the cradle to the end when the burial happened, okay? Now, one of the things you have to realize, it took almost 5 years to finalize all the reports after Macondo. The last one was the CSB's report. But all of these other reports are listed. These were all things that came out. These are in addition to what the attorneys came up with. These are the ones that came up from the Coast Guard, came up from the MMS, or soon to be the Bessie, that came up from the CSB, that came up from National Academy of Engineers and National Research Council. Now that one wasn't a bad one, but unfortunately all of those were PhDs, and let's be honest, how many PhDs really know what we do? Then in 2015, the final ruling came out, what we call the well control rule. This is one of the ones that the industry had the most problems with. None of the PE work was in this one, but again, we're looking at other certifications, such as shear rams. PEs are required to look at shear rams, such as wellhead movement. PEs are now being involved in looking at wellhead movement. Ladies and gentlemen, we've gone from a pipe in the hole to building a structure. That's what we're doing. We're building a structure that is no different than the building that we're in. Now, again, 2015, same thing. NSPE wrote to Bessie and said the same thing, that direct engineer, professional engineers have direct supervision over all engineering, design, operations, and maintenance of offshore oil rigs. The same letter they wrote 5 years ago. We've got more, we still don't have enough. And be honest, in this managing part, PEs may not be the manager that you want in place on the operation, okay? They may not have the experience to be a manager, and that's fine. So how does a professional engineer help the federal regulators and protect the public? Well, they brought in some of the rules. I'm called a SHME, okay? Gentleman I've been working for at Stone said 4 years ago, I need you to come to work for me to be my SHME. I had no idea what a SHME was. You've become a subject matter expert, okay? That's what your PE is, okay? PE can help out with these documents that have been brought in. Of the original 4, they've added these documents, they've added these documents, they've added these documents. So all of these documents are brought in under reference, and again, these follow the must, no longer shall, or no longer will. So the operator, including the smallest, to work in the federal waters has to be up on these documents. So one of the things that the law has required that to look at providing adequate centralization, so the PE's involved in this. Normally he or she's up to the requirements of, now it's become standard 65-2, determining adequate centralization. I'll tell you, my work now is dealing with the cement engineer directly. We're looking at the modeling, we're looking at the rheologies. These are things I did not learn in the university, nor do we teach today. 420 certificate signed by a registered engineer that the casing and cementing design is appropriate and is sufficient to satisfy. The PE's required on this. The PE's got to be familiar with both the casing and the cementing design. The operator's got to ensure the well design and calculations are appropriate for the purpose. That PE checks the work. That's what we do. We don't necessarily design it, we do the checking. I do design work. I do design work every day. But if I designed it, I have a second PE come back behind me and check my work. I need somebody to check my work. The person that says they don't, you don't need them working for you. This part here that the engineer must be involved. This is an interesting word, involved in the casing cementing design process. So you say, I'm going to design these wells and I'm going to have it, and then I'm going to give it to the PE to look at. I'm sorry, it's not a matter of certification. The word involve is in the law, and he has to be in the middle of the game, he or she. Professional engineer must be registered in the state of the United States and have sufficient expertise and experience to perform the certification. That's an interesting deal. It doesn't matter what state. What helps with this, what posts this, is that the engineer, he or she, must have sufficient expertise and experience. So who decides that? That professional engineer must be the one to decide that. The professional engineers, if given something to work on and they don't have the expertise, they must back away from it. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with not knowing something. What's wrong is stamping something that you don't know. Casing requirements unchanged. I just read this one earlier. It's still in there. We're still doing the same thing. You have to design your casing to do all the effects of the well, and the casing design must ensure well control during the drilling and safe operations during the life of the well. This one hasn't changed. For the most part, we totally ignored it before 2010. We really, in a lot of cases, we really did. We've gone beyond the days of designing wells off an Excel spreadsheet. That's a fact, Jack. We all did it with pencil before. We did it with tablets before. But these wells today and these thermal effects, you just can't do it with an Excel spreadsheet anymore. So the strengths and weaknesses of the professional engineer requirement. Obviously the strengths are they're looking at the work, okay? One of the weaknesses of the problem that we've got with it, you have a state regulated engineer working in the federal waters, okay? Let's take the state of Louisiana. If I have a problem with another PE, or if I see something that I feel is unsafe, I write a letter, I submit it to the state board. The state board does the investigation. I'm out of the picture. I only bring it to the state board's review. The state board's investigators take a look at it, and they deem whether something should or should not be done, either to the PE or either to whatever's going on that could be possibly against public health and safety. In this structure today, who do I write? Who do I report it to? Well, I could report it to the federal government, but they're still part of the BSEE. And here's another problem. If the licensed engineer puts off on something and says that this is good, they believe it's safe, and it can go to BSEE, and BSEE can go, I don't believe that. I don't agree with it. And now, is it because they're not a licensed engineer? Not necessarily so. I'll give you, for instance, real quick that happened for us, okay? Working for an operator I was working for. The law requires that the operator must cover, that he must plan to cover his hydrocarbon events by a minimum of 500 feet of concrete, of slurry, okay? That's a good rule. He must plan to cover the hydrocarbon event. However, in this particular well, in this particular instance, they lost circulation while they were pumping the cement job, okay? So after the cement job, a cement bond log was run, which is also one of the requirements now. And this particular operator had seemed like it was 251 feet of adequate coverage with good bonding, no channel, no nothing indicated at all. And again, this was in a low pressure well, okay? So this is on a Saturday. We wrote it up as such. The engineers reviewed it. I sat and looked at the logs, looked at the cement bond logs, wrote it up. I recommended to the federal that it was adequate, that it met the term adequate coverage. And again, that's in the law. You must have adequate coverage, okay? We got a ding right back. No, okay? No why, no nothing, no other reason, no, okay? So immediately, I requested that we bring in the district manager. Oh, they always like that. You know, when you bring that in on the weekend, I need the district manager brought in. And then we rewrote it to say not only did it provide adequate coverage, that during the completion with a live annulus, if we went ahead and perforated to squeeze, what do you squeeze 250 more feet of cement? Do you block squeeze until you block squeeze, until you block squeeze, until you block squeeze, till you've got 500 feet of coverage, but you've got 250 feet of perforations above where you're going to perforate? There's not much safety in that. Okay, so, and again, the other thing that we recommended to them, it said, if we don't do it this way, then we can't recover the reserves and you can't get your money out of the well. That was one that brought them on. So when the Bessie says, well, we want to talk about money, when you bring up the fact on that you ain't going to recover the reserves, that kind of brought that in. We were able to do what we needed to do. Okay, but these are on a course by instant. This is a weakness and part of the problem. Okay, the PE can't go to somebody else and say, can you be an arbitrator in this? Okay, it's very, very difficult. Again, if you're working for an operator, the operator wants you to do something that you can't do, you must back away. Okay, your state requirement requires that, even though you're working in the federal side. And another weakness that we have with it, you saw the strengths, another weakness is across the board in different states, the licensing is somewhat different, okay? State of Louisiana requires 2 tests. Now, of interest today, you can take the first test, wait a month, and if it's available, sit for the PE, pass the PE, but you have to wait 4 years to get the experience under an engineer. The license test for the PE work today has nothing to do with what we're doing now. There's not a question in it that talks about any of these things that the PE does now. So we're kind of moving in the weakness part of it, and we've talked amongst ourselves too, is this generalized license test that we've taken where the PE, instead of being an experienced and well-designed, has to know reservoir and logging and pumping and compression. We probably need to look at moving forward to a well integrity license, okay, for PE. There are multiple licenses for civil and mechanical. I'm thinking personally, and I've talked to some of the people, I think we need to move to that. I think we need to move to something like that. Now, I've had people say on the boards, well, there's not enough people to take the test. My friends, there's only 28 people took the nuclear engineering test last year, okay? So I would suspect there's going to be at least 28 people a year that would take a well integrity test, okay? Again, we're looking for the safety of the public. So that's one of the weaknesses of the test. The testing, the other part is the problem, who do you go to when you have a problem? Who do you discuss this with? Now, the other thing, the last thing I want to go on here is there a better way? You know, I roll over this one here. And again, being a PE late in life and 35 years of thinking wells, I'm going to suggest something out of the box on this thing, and I've kind of kicked it around, and people said, maybe. It's almost at a time to where on some things, on the rules that you have to have the industry and PE working together. We actually did on the well control rules, okay? I can tell you The former administration recommended some extremely harsh rules, which they didn't understand. In some cases, they were litigated out of Virginia and not at the district levels. API, OOC, Offshore Operators Committee combined, I served on some of those. We pushed back and said we disagree. We hem-hawed back and forth, and through arbitration, through discussion, we were able to get together a better rule. So that worked, okay? I think that this part of the PE being licensed across different states, I don't know if you should go to a federal license, okay? I'll tell you, out of interest, you can work for the federal government, you can work for the Corps of Engineers, you don't have to have a license, okay? The federal government does not require their people to have a license. There are some that do, and there are some that are very good, okay, on the regulatory side. So it's almost, if you're working, we're pushing I've taught 4 classes I've taught 4 semesters the last 2 years at night at UL. I've pushed every one of my students in all of my classes to take the FE now. I have pushed them to take the FE and to go on and become professional engineers because we really need that in this business. That is one of the better ways that we've got to do. Another thing that we have got to do, we have got to get through the universities, is we need to teach some practical work to these kids. Okay, we really do. The theoretical is fine, but you really need some practicality. You really need to have, if you can, bring in some people that have done this kind of work, people that maybe have retired or looking for something, can certainly help these kids not only get jobs, but have some knowledge in what they're going to be doing, so they can get off and start working. They come out with the FE, they take their PE, and they can get off and run it. They can go on. Again, for someone to get out of college, 4 years, take the PE, they're not here yet. They can't get that experience yet to do this work. Now, some things, yes, okay? Now, is there a better way? One of the interesting things I've kicked around with the Department of Conservation, the state of Louisiana does not require this in their wells, okay? Especially in the abandonment of their wells, okay? We probably should, okay? Now, there's be a lot of pushback. People say, well, it's going to cost me more money. It's not a matter of costing you money. It's a matter of working to protect the public good. So every engineer says, well, you know, I want to be a PE to certify. No. Every one of us that goes through this realizes we do this for the protection of the public good. And you ask the kids in class, why be a PE? And they'll all tell you the same thing. Well, so you can do case design, so you can do this, so you can do this. And rarely do they understand until you bring it out, for the protection of the public good. And that's what it's about. That's why I went and did it. That's why at my age I went back to go, because I sure can't push a youngster to go do it if I haven't had led it. So those of us that are older PEs, we owe it back to the profession to push the younger ones to not make some of the mistakes that we did. I'm open to any questions.
Do you have any comment on the production safety system rules?
You know, what the production safety rules, from what I've understood, okay, a lot of the facilities now with their drawings, I think they're requiring the licensed engineers to look at it. It's not my area of expertise. If they don't, they should, but I believe that they have gotten involved in it. It's kind of, we kind of catalog ourselves. I mean, even though I could sign off, being a PE, I could stamp a production drawing. But by the law, by my code, I can't. I haven't worked production code in 35 years. I haven't done production vessels since I was a pumper 40 years ago working for Union, as a college kid. So it's not outside of my level of expertise. I would have to say we'd have to bring in the drawing. I can tell you, especially in subsea, and I should probably move to the same side on that we're doing more structural work than we did. We want to know what the wellhead's doing. We want to know what's going to happen with the drive off. I have been up to my arms and up to my head and running Wellcat on thermal loads. I want to know what the well's going to do when I turn it on, and I want to know what it's going to do when I turn it off. I want to know what all the temperatures are, and I want to know the fluids behind it. And these are things that I didn't learn at the university level. I would suggest petroleum engineers today, if they want to get in this world, take a course in thermal design, one we didn't take. We certainly all took a course in Fortran that we never used, but again, it wasn't bad to learn code, just never used it. And we certainly all took courses in calculus that we, for the most, never used. I certainly used calculus this morning because Patsy was pushing the differential of that accelerator while we got behind the cane truck trying to get here this morning. So how fast and what's acceleration can you get here, So, no. Other questions? There's got to be some more questions. Got to be. Yes, sir.
Rick, one of my concerns as a PE is the consequences well, for one, when they say subject matter expert, I get very concerned about that. I feel like I might be an expert in certain areas, but even if something were to occur and it went to a situation where you maybe even go to court, there's people out there that are really subject matter experts that could probably blow me out of the water on some of the things. You know what I'm saying? Like, for instance, casing. I'm not a casing design expert, but I'll take that for example. Maybe get somebody at Blade, like a David Lewis or a Bob Moe at Viking. Mm-hmm. They know, they could probably
I know.
question your expert, your word, subject matter expert. You know what I'm saying?
I'll tell you who when I'm working and I'm looking for certification work, I go to Viking. Okay, so I'm right in the middle. I've known Bob for years, okay? Because I'm not from Dallas, I'm aware of Blade. I just never have used the Blade people, you become a bookworm, okay? You become knowledgeable. You've got to do this every day. And again, one of the things that you find with the PE is the PE is the checker. He checks the work. That's what he's supposed to come back behind somebody. For a well that is not very critical, meaning and again, there's all definitions of critical, including high temp, high pressure, subsea, yada, yada, yada. A PE can review certain work that he's comfortable with. If he's not, he needs to step away from it, okay? I have been sending my Wellcat work to Viking to have Viking certified. That's a tough place to do it because there's not many people that really understand Wellcat, okay? But I send my models to them and they review the models and say, okay, yay or nay. Now there's some disagreements on how things are done and there should be, okay? But again, the PE discusses, and so this matter of can it be done in a week, some of these times may take 2 to 3 weeks, or a visit, a cup of coffee with somebody. And then after it's done, you may have to go to the federal regulator with the cartoons and the pictures and go through everything without lots of technical work just to get it through. And it's a solid design because it's outside the realm of their experience. So it's a growing world. With this 30 hours, you've got to spend some money and go look and do some things. If you want to be in this, if you really want to be top notch now, you're looking at getting some extra education. It forces us as PEs to get this extra education. Okay, and if you want to do that kind of work, you don't have a choice, you got to. It's as dynamic, it's no longer static for us anymore. It's dynamic. So, questions? I mean, we all designed wells for the drilling. Every one of us designed, just so we could drill and get to the bottom, okay? It's not like that anymore. It's what's gonna go on when we turn them on and what's gonna go on when we turn them off. We're in the middle of that now. Any other questions? I appreciate y'all waiting. I figured y'all were all waiting for the 10:30 talk. Marcel is going to give the 10:30 talk. I can tell you, stick around. It's going to be a real good talk. I've heard him talk before. It's your last talk for the morning. So if you sat through this one, his next one is going to be excellent. So he's on time today. Thank y'all for staying with me.
Thank you.
Thank you.